Okay, so what I want to talk about today is a little bit about houses in different neighborhoods and what kind of construction methods. And I'm going to start by telling you guys, hey, I've done a lot of work on my own house and my own properties, as well as I've been through hundreds and hundreds of home inspections. So I know a lot now, accumulated a lot of knowledge about homes through home inspectors and, of course, through my own work. And I'm no stranger to even getting dirty myself. I myself took an old house and made it into a walkout basement. I pulled electrical permits. I've done a lot of work. I've done some tiling work. I've done just about everything in regards to the houses that I've owned. And so I can sure be a help to the buyer that really wants to know what they're buying and what different. We're going to talk about what different age of homes and the types of problems that they have that would be uncovered in a home inspection. So we're going to go through this year by year. Okay, so this is a longer video because it has a lot of different sections of a lot of different years. So you can actually skip ahead in the video. The video is marked so that you can skip ahead to the age group of homes that you're most interested in. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the areas that you'll find the oldest homes, and I'm going to put a broad range in the first group of built from 1900 to 1940. In Calgary is barely there's not going to be much to find in that age group, but it'll tell you where those houses are located when I come up with the sales. Okay, so what you've got is that all of the sales are in the inner city, as you could quite imagine. Okay, and I want to talk about the home construction methods back then. You know, it's interesting. I often get people telling me that they would like to renovate an old house in the inner city because it'd be cute to do that. So essentially, when we're looking at some of these older properties, what we're going to find is these, like in the lower price ranges, this is land value, okay? But let's look at the house, for example. This one has been updated. So when we call it updated, here's what it looks like. I mean, they've done a nice job of it, but there's some issues here you'll notice just from looking at the pictures. Oftentimes these homes are added onto. This one was added onto the front, so they rechanged the front of the house. This would have been a very, very small house. Now, being that it was built in 1911, typically they don't have a basement. This one's is partial unfinished. It's likely, just a dirt. Like it might have some concrete going down 4 feet, but usually there's just utilities in the basement of these properties. This one looks like they've got some nice new windows in it. That's probably been added on a bunch of times. You can see here that this is the old cast iron stack or vent for the plumbing in it, right? And typically what I'm finding with these types of houses that, although some people like to fix them up, the problem is with these little houses is that at the time, a lot of the additions never had to have permits on them. If you can, as far as, the concrete isn't in the ground it's not in the ground 4 feet. So that means that there's a lot of settling, a lot of cracking on the drywall and everything else. And if you're lucky enough to find one that has had some work done to it, you know, then like they needs new electrical. The plumbing's not usually all that good. Here's one that's been boarded up at this point because most of these houses, I would say, are the kind of homes that you'd want to just simply take down. You really don't want it unless somebody's gone through the time to put some energy into these things. They don't typically fare that well. Like this one's cute. You can see the nice old trim in it. It's small. We're talking 721 square feet for 670,000. You got to really want to live in the inner city badly. The electrical at the time of this house was knob and tube, they called it. So unless somebody pulled new wires through the walls, it's probably going to have two wire running through the walls that's not even insulated at that point, right? So if you touch the wiring, you have to have new permits done. Most of these properties, the sellers don't know regarding whether or not the permits were taken throughout the life of the property for electrical and plumbing. Most times these are unknown. This one looks like they put some new windows in, but they're hard houses to work on and they require a lot of work. But some of them, put some work in. Now this one looks like had a porch put on the back. So like I say, these are really tiny homes, a lot of them. So the next group I want to talk about is 1940 to 1960. I picked this particular group of homes because the construction methods were very similar in these types of homes. Okay, so I happen to know a lot about 1940 because my house currently is a 1942 home. So let's look on the map and let's look at the communities you're going to find these in. Okay, so we've got now we got a little bit different areas. Okay, so we got all the areas in here. We're talking about Glamorgan, Glendale, Ross Carrick. You know, there was nothing when I started as an agent built past Sarcee. Okay, so when you go north, you go as high as, you know, we're talking Upper North Haven, Thorncliffe. You know, this would be an old farmhouse, but you know, Trywood, Charleswood, University might have some actually. That so in Montgomery and Bowness. Bowness used to be its own town, right? So it used to be the town of Bowness, so it has its own thing. The other area that it was its own town was actually Ogden used to be its own town. So you'll find that Ogden has homes that are really, really old because it was its own town. And you'll find that Southview has these areas like Forest Lawn. They have some older homes in there. They were spotty as far as when they were built. Ramsey definitely has older properties. And so the construction methods of these types of properties, just to go through it. So when we got a house like this one, so this is typical for a 40s house, and I'm going to say, what is this? 1953. So 1953, foundations were often block or concrete. Now, I noticed with my own foundation that there was no, usually there was no actual footing below the foundation. In other words, they created the walls, maybe 8-inch thick concrete, and they poured them straight. There's when you get to the bottom of the wall, there's actually no bottom footing. I'll just show you what that looks like. So here's my own property here, and at the bottom there was block on one side, and then there's a footing, as a footing back here. Okay, so what I mean by a footing here is that on the bottom here it's 2 feet wide by 2 feet thick, and then the foundation wall will go on top of that, would be about 8 inches. So what I'm saying is that there was no footing at the bottom of my foundation, and a lot of the basements are built that way. Now it's not terrible if it was done on undisturbed soil and the basements didn't crack. I mean, one thing that I would give these properties credit for is that they, you know, there's a what is it? There's a 60-year testimonial here. I mean, you know, they've definitely they've definitely proved that they can last. You know, they've I guess that's 80, well, 70. Yeah, that we're talking about 80 years. So that's pretty good when you talk about these types of homes that they've lasted this long. And of course, they're on nicer, older neighborhoods with bigger lots. Usually the lots are, you know, 50 feet by 125 or 135, zoned R2, so you can put two properties on them. And when you look at them, so the electrical on these is generally going to be, uh, it's going to be 2-wire. Matter of fact, they didn't have grounded plug-ins back then. They just had the 2-wire. So that's one of the things that most people want to upgrade with these types of properties. My property did not have any insulation in the walls. And at this construction methods, they didn't have drywall back then. So the walls are often plastered floor to ceiling. And they got these nice rounded, you know, entryways and stuff, which is cute. But again, the ceilings are plastered. They're works of art, but they're not. They're like a board. They call it kind of like a buckboard, and it's kind of a situation where it's put onto just plastered ceiling. That's a board, and they plastered over the ceiling. Those older homes in the 1930s, from what I just talked about, are lath and plaster, so they're really hard to work on. You almost have to tear the walls right out and put drywall in. So on these ones, the plumbing was often cast iron. These ceiling tiles here are sometimes they're asbestos ceiling tiles that you have to work through and deal with. Often, you know, here we got, look at the plumbing on this picture right here. You can see there was you know, they painted it, and it was, some of it was ABS, they painted, and some was cast iron. So you see things are tied in. Electricals on the outside. Some of them have the gas meters still on the inside of the property. And this is typical of an old wood window that would be on these properties, wood soffits, you know, and some of this siding back then, they were using asbestos for everything. And I had sold a property that had asbestos siding on it. So some of this stuff, like as long as you don't disturb asbestos, you can remove it. But a lot of people are afraid of that. Here's this one's got an old garage here. There's some really tiny garage. Can you imagine the garages they would have had back at that time? You know, 1940s, cars were smaller, and people only had one garage. So one car. So that would be more or less what you'd find, right? So, these types of homes, you can expect to have to redo electrical, uh, and and plumbing in them if they haven't been done already, and of course the windows. A lot of these have raised basements on them, so the basement windows were nice and big, and that's good. This was what we call a bi-level, and but again, this one has the old windows in it, and the roof structure was stick built. So when you take a wall out, you have to worry about the ceiling falling in. So you have to put beams in and lintels in to support everything. Concrete back then in the 40 to 50, in those areas was pretty good. Concrete was good. Actually, you didn't have to worry about concrete. Um, it was very solid, most of it, and it was really thick concrete. And they put a lot of heavy gravel into it. And so you're looking at, if you want to do a renovation job on a property, uh, you got to deal with plumbing, and you got to deal with electrical, and you probably have to deal with insulation. You might have to deal with asbestos, right? These are parts of this. I sell these kind of houses all the time. This Armstrong tile that was put down, and as long as it peels up okay, it's a, sometimes it has asbestos in it, sometimes it doesn't. But it does. And see, again, with this age of house, I mean, it does have full basement and full ceiling heights. We were doing that back then. Whereas, of course, we were talking earlier about 1930. Often didn't have. I was in a 1930 house, and it had a poplar tree holding up the middle of the floor. So these when they got to 1940 to 1960, they changed quite a bit. Now these old furnaces back then, they lasted forever, and they still last because the old heat exchangers were built, welded, handmade, and so there's no electronics in them to speak of, but they do last. So as far south as you're going to find these, going to Southwood, just tip of Southwood, Haysboro starts to get to be 1960, but nothing before. Like really, you wouldn't find a 40s house there. You'll find late 50s and mostly 60s. Same with Acadia. You got a few properties, and if I look at this one in Acadia for 500, it was built in 1960, right? So Acadia was built in about 1960, and that's kind of where we get to, we're with the end of the 1960 again. So when we look at that area, so anything in between here, now Meadowlark Park is late 50s. Let's look at that. So 55, right? So really, you're going to find that it's mostly inner city, what we call inner city, and then as far north as Thorncliffe, well, that'll probably give us 1960. Let's look. 1954. Okay, so we got 1954 in Thorncliffe, and then we got those old towns again. So we got like places like a lot would be going on in Forest Lawn, Forest Heights. We'd have a fair amount, but most of those are 60s homes. So let's go to the next category. So now I'm splitting it up a little bit, 1960 to 1975. Let's look at the results here, and let's look at our map. And that tells us the communities that they were built in, right? So you're going to find some, of course, in the inner city. You'll always find that. But like when we talk about North Glenmore, we're talking about Lakeview. Now, most of the houses in Lakeview are 60s homes. We got the odd smattering of homes in Killarney in these areas. Most of them are a little bit older than that. We got some later properties. Now over here in Dover was built mostly in the 60s in those areas, and we've got areas like Willow Park, and Lake Bonavista was even built. Now Lake Bonavista would be mostly 70s. Let's look at this one. So it's 72, right? So but 60s was probably the end of the 60s would have been like Willow Park, right? Willow Park would have been like the end of the 60s, and we've got 1966 here. So those would be new houses in 66. Okay, so let's talk about construction with these types of homes, and I'm very familiar with these types of homes. This was a house that was renovated in Acadia to some extent. Now, it was very popular in the 60s to do bungalows. Most of these are bungalows. We've got a few 4-level splits like this one. That's not very common. So they came up with a bi-level, a 4-level split, and a 3-level split, and there's the odd 2-story in the area. There's almost no 2-story homes in these areas. They're all lower level. So bungalows, 4-level splits, 3-level splits, and bi-levels. The 2 stories are just very, very rare in these areas, right? But they didn't build a lot of them. And so if you go over here to now going into Oak Ridge, these will be 70s, right? So 70s, 71. See, it's a 2-story. So in the 60s, they weren't building 2 stories. They were building bungalows, 4-level splits and bi-levels. And then when we go to 70s, they got more, they got a little bit, bigger homes. People seem to make a little bit more money, so I guess they wanted to do that. Now, typically 60s houses, early 60s may not have engineered ceiling joists, really. So when we talk about what that means is that, like, on a home that has an engineered truss, a ceiling truss, it'll have, and this is a beautiful renovation. Let's try to find an old house. Let's see that one that's not renovated. Great, I was in this house. I showed this house. Okay, so this one here was virtually staged. Somebody renovated it down along the way. So you can see here that it was probably early 60s, so what, late 60s, okay. So they did want to open the plan up. So they did open, everybody wants to have the open kitchen design. So recognizing that the property did not have engineered joists, what they did was they put a beam in, and they put a beam in this way. So they need to be supported. Now, what I liked about 60s homes was that they were all built with plumbing that was typically copper. Typically, copper plumbing is probably one of the better plumbings around. They stopped using copper now because, of course, it's too expensive to put copper in homes because copper, the price of it is high. Now, in 60s homes and 70s homes, electrical service was typically 100 amps, whereas if you go back to 1930, the electrical service wasn't very good. It might have been 60 amps, right? Not very good electrical there. But these houses had, they were insulated. They typically had aluminum slider windows, which still last today. They're just not very efficient. And they had, plumbing was mostly either copper or PVC. So the plumbing in these houses is good. The electrical in these houses is good. Some of them in the 70s, because copper got too expensive, they went to aluminum wire. So some of them have aluminum wiring, and I won't go on about aluminum wiring too much, but I will just say that with aluminum wiring, that you have a situation with that is that it's the connectors that are the problem. We still have a lot of aluminum wiring in Calgary, and people still get home insurance, and not every house burns down, of course, obviously. This is a typical old house. Now look at the registers in this house. So you've got the registers they're almost in the wall, so it's hard to fix that. What's great about those houses, a lot of them were done in hardwood. And the hardwood that they put in houses at that time was really old hardwood. It's so hard that you can't even drive a nail into it because it came from older trees back then. This home had the wind. I like to see these homes because a lot of elderly people own these houses. They do the most important stuff. They put windows in, they put a new roof on, they put a new furnace in, and oftentimes these houses are great houses except for the cosmetics. And they're great houses to work on because, like I said, copper, 3-wire grounded electrical, fully insulated. They have a footing on the bottom of the foundation wall, and so they're well supported. I don't find in home inspections where we get too many people saying, that the foundation's no good. And they've been there for so long that those foundations are usually really good. Most of them have hot water heaters and new furnaces and the older venting here. So they got wood joists. Now the joists in here are probably 2x10 or 2x12. They're good, solid construction. And we don't even put that in houses anymore. The great thing about these things, if you ever had a flood in your house, they just dry out. They're just fine. The flooring, concrete floors in these basements are typically about 3 to 4 inches thick. And so although there's surface cracking on floors, it's not even a big deal. And the home inspector has come to me and said, oh, the flooring's terrible. You got to replace the floor. I have been in the last month, one house that was built in the 40s that the foundation was bad and it was sinking and the whole middle of the floor was rising up in the middle. But you'll see there's a crack here unless somebody put some sealant on, but it's not displaced or anything else. So these ones were actually pretty good homes altogether. Like I said, I've been through a lot of home inspections with these types of homes, and home inspectors come back with all the same normal things. Sometimes it's a furnace, sometimes a hot water heater, Sometimes it's water in the basement where the weeping towel is full. But plumbing and electrical and like is generally pretty good. They'll come back with the windows. Now, being they were built in the 70s, on the upstairs, some of the drywall can be asbestos in the drywall, but mostly you'll find that if there was asbestos, it would be in the filler that they use to fill the drywall with. So that's that typical style of home. That it's a pretty good house, and I certainly think that they had great lots, nice communities, wide streets, big sidewalks. A lot of people like these, but the square footage is low. We're mostly inner city homes here. What I call emerging areas for 50s, like these houses, because they're not too far out, and of course you won't find any out in these outer areas where I'll get. See, all the city is developed according to the age. So as we go further from downtown, we find newer and newer homes. So let's look at the next group. Okay, so I decided to go from 1975 to 1988. The reason is because there was some pretty major changes in around 1990, and so we'll talk about those. But let's look at the kind of neighborhoods you're going to find that area of homes in and how they're constructed. So Riverbend, has a lot of older homes in there. And in this era, what's really interesting about actually, this is Ogden. This is this is Linwood. And then we've got Riverbend that's got a few homes in there. And these particular homes, like what interests me about anything that was done in the 80s is that the 80s, people started becoming a little bit more wealthy, right? So what did they start doing in the 70s and 80s? They started putting half bathrooms off a master bedroom, or they put a full bathroom off of a master bedroom. So you previously couldn't find that. Like if you're looking at a 60s home, oftentimes there's no half bathroom off the master, and the closets are smaller. Remember, in Canada, clothing was expensive when it was made here. Now, once it started being made in China in the late 80s, and everything came from China, everything got cheaper. So people wanted walk-in closets or double closets. That's what happened at that era, right? So construction methods, floor joists were still typically 2x8 construction. No, pardon me, 2x12, right? 2x10 and 2x12. And houses got bigger, houses got more unique. Let's look at Braeside. Braeside was like, this was a typical bi-level built, but we have a lot of unique style homes. Like let's go. So a lot of these, here's a good example of a home. 1976, this particular home was a two-story split. Now, that we didn't have really two-story splits before this, right? This one was built in 76. A two-story split means one side of it's a bungalow, the other side has two stories. There's no bonus rooms in these two stories. There never was. There's an odd home that has an upstairs living room, but very, very rare. Typically, these homes, they had, this one had updated. Look at this cabinetry. So this is original cabinetry. So it was custom made, built on site, and it had the outer hinges on it. The plumbing, of course, was as good as it was for the 60s. It was still copper, and it still had PVC piping for the drains, and full height 8-foot ceilings in the basement, and often the windows were aluminum sliders or even powder coated aluminum sliders. So this one would have new windows. They was doing a lot of things like with these. People hated this, but they had all these levels. It was considered to be very extravagant to have multiple levels in properties, like meaning that you have sunken living rooms to create a little bit higher ceiling height. So you can see 2 steps down at 7 inches each. It's 14 inches higher in the living room, and they thought that was great. People don't like it now because they don't want to have this sunken area demise their living room. They would like the living room to have a different a different feel. They would like to be able to move furniture wherever they want and make the living room smaller or bigger or move the kitchen around, but you couldn't do that in these houses. The other compromise with this house was that usually under these sunken areas, they didn't make the basement deep enough so that the basement had low ceilings where they had these. Now, typically these all had 8-foot ceilings on the main floor. So that would be the height of the kitchen. And what was popular back then is we call it a sunshine ceiling, or a fluorescent lighted ceiling that was dropped down. I don't know if I can show you that. Okay, that's hard to find, but here's another property here we'll go on about. So So here's the typical style of kitchen that you had. Now, it was kind of almost like a galley style kitchen. They were really hard properties to open the layout up. Like because of the supporting walls, you really couldn't open them up very much. And so the kitchens are kind of closed. And at that time, the style was like, and here's the main living area, and you got a little door there. That time the style was is the kitchen was separate from the living areas. Like we've gone with a different style completely, but it's hard to open these up only because this would be a supporting wall for the upstairs on a two-story split. So they're very difficult to open up. And if you were to put a beam in, you'd have to carry the load through the basement and put a footing in. Of course, this one has a sunken living room, which is really sunken. And of course, it has a lower ceiling height to come down here, and I don't know what the basement would look like here. And a lot of times there's just a 3 foot crawl space underneath there on this kind of a split level. And as I'm saying, here it is, right? So good construction methods, like they put a beam in. Some of them had steel beams in at that time, which were a little bit bouncy, but 2x10 or 2x12 floor joists, whatever the span was at the time. Heating systems generally were just forced air systems. This one here, I don't know what kind of bathroom it has, but most likely it has a three-piece. So it has a bathroom and a shower. Again, these are original cabinetry. They would have been pine, built on site. And at this time, this would have been the original vanity. So it would have had, like, with that fake marble, which is molded, they called it natural or something. I can't remember. This is like a clamshell sink that was poured out about kind of not a porcelain, but a plastic product. These old tubs were old steel tubs. And so the bathrooms were smaller. They had, they were well insulated. They typically had aluminum powder coated sliders for windows in them. The electrical was, again, 100 amps. So nothing's changed with electrical since about the 60s in our city. Really the 60s, they went to 100 amp service most places, and that's what all the homes have now, even today. So electrical's good. And PVC plumbing, these would have, some of them would have copper, but they wouldn't have any PEX or anything else like that at this particular time period. So these homes, and they had these old, like I said, custom cabinets that were built on site. Of course, most people want to replace them. They don't have any nice gliding drawers or anything like that. Typical neighborhoods we find this age of house in. Let's look and go how far south we can go. We don't have a lot. We'll have some, like, okay, so we have some in Shaughnessy, which is bizarre to me. That would be late 80s, I would say. That would be, 81. Here we go in 1981. But these 80s homes, they had lots of character. Look at the angles of the roofs. They were getting like ultra modern. They were really trying to do some creative things. But they were all 2x4 construction. So the walls weren't as thick and didn't provide as much insulation. Here's a typical little bar that's in the living room. We put bars in at that time. And the kitchens were typically, cubbyhole kitchens. They weren't a lot of open plans back then. Some of the buildings had, vaulted ceilings. This one has wood siding. So, you have to paint and maintain the siding of these properties where they haven't done the siding. And the windows often in these homes need to be replaced. Here's that sunshine ceiling I was looking for. So they dropped the ceiling to the top of the cabinets, and then they put, they stippled the ceiling, the popcorn style ceiling, and then they got the commercial style lighting with the fluorescent lights behind. People started putting fluorescent lights in to save on electricity. And the whiter light they thought was brighter, so that was their thing back then. A lot of the houses in the 70s and 80s had nice fireplaces in them with log lighters that would put a real wood burning fireplace, not a gas fireplace in those stuff. Heating systems were forced air systems, and they were all good systems. But as we get older in time, some of the furnaces actually weren't as good a quality as the previous ones. I mean, as far as lasting, the heat exchangers were thinner and stuff. Here's a renovated home, and this would probably be what year? 85. So we started building bigger homes in the 80s, right? So they curved staircases here. This is 2-story in the front living area, and some more later 80s, more architecture. But the kitchens were still like this one. They weren't able to open it up to the living room, of course. They were able to change it a little bit because they had a little family room next to it. So the family room was here, I don't know if that would be on the same level, but they were, late 80s gets to be a little bit more the ability to renovate it and change it a little bit. Um, and 2x4 walls in most of these houses. So, the efficiency is not as high. This one was well renovated and a nice house built in 1985. Of course, Woodbine sold for 1.3 million. Good square footage, 2,900 square feet in this particular house. Of course, you'll not find a bonus room at that age group. Okay, so typically what I wanted to say about these houses, now the types of siding that we saw in these types of neighborhoods like Woodbine. So I've been through a lot of these houses and did a lot of home inspections done, and you see this stucco here, right? And it's stucco and brick. Now, the stucco and brick, the stucco at that time was a concrete stucco, and it was interlayed with this wood. They put some wood there that always had to be repainted. Now, the problem with this is that the stucco at the time was a concrete stucco. It didn't have any acrylics like we have in today. So often a house that was fully stuccoed in an area like Woodbine, the stucco would be chipping off and it have to be done. It had a lot of cracks in it, things like that, because the water would get, you know, because of our city, which is, very, changes the temperature in the wintertime. It goes from, minus 25 to plus 10 in a day almost, and so the water is running through and into all the cracks and busting off all of the stucco. The brick exteriors were pretty good, but a lot of people don't like the styles of those so much anymore. They started doing in this later 80s, they started doing a lot of cedar shakes. And the cedar shakes, they put them on any kind of roof. Sometimes they were low slope and sometimes they would rot. And sometimes if they were steep, they would be pretty good. But you can see this is a stucco exterior. And it was a very aggressive exterior on the outside. Now, you can see this one originally had aluminum soffits on it and the the nice eaves troughs on it. Lots of homes in, say, Riverbend, which was a newer area, Cedar Brae, Oak Ridge. Now out here, now I think we've got Strathcona, which was older, and some in Patterson. We're not going to talk about this. This is areas where they would have ripped houses down and built new ones. Up north here, we're not going to see a lot of houses till we get to ranch lands. Okay, so ranch lands, Silver Springs, Scenic Acres, Hawkwood, Edgemont. These are areas. Now, every house I swear, every house in ranchlands is a unique home. Like in the 60s, with all of the bungalows that were created in Acadia, Fairview, and Huntington, Thorncliffe, they're all cookie cutters. They're all the same kind of houses. You drive through the area, every house is similar. There's only 3 plans, but you go into in ranchlands or Hawkwood, there's a million different plans up here. It's like everybody sat down with a builder and built a custom home just for them. So you'll find a lot of unique houses. Now, they still built the typical bungalow. They were bigger. They started building the typical bungalow, 1,200 to 1,400 square feet, which is nice, right? That was, and they give people a half bathroom, right? So here's one over here. What's in Scenic Acres here? 1987. What is this? It's a two-story split, right? Half the house is a bungalow. The other, maybe actually put not high ceilings in this one. That's incredible. So, and look at the fading on the doors. So the color styles back then were darker wood, and this was like they faded in some darker on the trim, and they did wood country style, railings. Again, remember we said all the sunken areas. There's how many levels. You walk in one level, you can step up to the front formal living room, then step up to the dining room, then into the kitchen, then go up the stairs to the other side. So we got lots of levels in these houses. They're very hard homes to change. People always say, well, can I make it an open plan? It's really hard to change these plans. They were so unique and they had so many supporting walls. And, like they don't have walk-in closets in that period. They're all double closets, right? Double closets, regular size closets. I mean, for the time they were beautiful, but as we know, we don't like this stuff so much now. And this would have been original wood burning fireplace with a log lighter. That's what they came up with then. And this house has had, of course, some upgrades as it's gone along, and the utility rooms. So we've got typical, solid floor joists with these had. And now this one here, look at all the pecs we see. Somebody redid all of this and they went away from it. So I'm thinking that because this was late 80s, they probably had poly B piping. And so when poly B arrived, it was the newest thing. It was plastic piping, but the problem is that sometimes it would crack and leak, and people replaced all of it, right? So this would be the emergence of poly B piping. These houses would have had all good electrical service as well. This is a furnace from probably the 90s, right? Furnaces up from the 90s are still good. I've got a furnace like a Weathermaker like this myself. The furnace guy told me that they can rebuild these forever almost. So they're still pretty good furnaces, right? Lots were typically still pretty big in the 80s. People wanted bigger lots. They didn't start getting smaller until later. So when we look at where we got houses, now we go to Beddington, McEwen, and then in the east we've got, everything up until Taradale Martindale is older. Uh, and then, Marlborough was a lot of homes. I would say that these houses would be probably mostly 70s in here. Yeah, 70s for that, right? And they're all bungalows. So we didn't, later in the 80s, we started doing bigger homes. And so you're going to find with Calgary is that if you say, I want to live in a particular neighborhood, if you want to find a particular home style, there's only certain home styles in certain neighborhoods. And, you can call me and ask me which neighborhood you think what kind of style of home you want. Sometimes on my websites, I get people looking for houses that simply don't exist. They're saying, look, I want a 2-story home in Acadia with a bonus room. I'm saying, look, they never built that in Acadia. It doesn't exist, right? It doesn't exist in, Ranchlands or Hawkwood either. It doesn't exist. They don't exist because of the time they were built. Okay, so now we're going to go up from 1990 or 1988 all the way up to 2000. Okay, because this particular group is now we started to change the way houses are built. So what we start to see now, let's look at the areas you find these age of homes in. So now you're starting to see that Signal Hill, in this area, and you're going to see in the northwest, you're going to see Valley Ridge, right? You're going to see Tuscany, Scenic Acres, Arbor Lake, all Citadel, Hamptons, Hidden Valley, parts of Coventry Hill, the older part of Coventry Hill, Harvest Hills, no, there's nothing here in Huntington. That's just rebuilds. Now, Martindale and Coral Springs and Monterey Park. These were areas that were built in the east. And then you go down south, and you're going to see these communities down south. So, Douglasdale, and of course Mackenzie Lake, and so we've got Mackenzie Town, which I would say very rare. That would be the late part of of the 90s. And Shaughnessy was all built in the late 90s, and Bridlewood, Sundance, and then Chaparral. Chaparral just started to be built in the late 90s, right? So in that area. So when it comes to these houses, they were still using, and of course Arbor Lake created some nice property. They had some nice communities, but what the big design change that came in the 90s was actually 2x6 walls. So when they went to 2x6 walls, the insulation factor was much better. They're still building 2-story splits. They didn't start building bonus rooms till about the year 2000. And so this is a 2-story split. And I think I even showed this house this year. And this is in Arbor Lake. Now the negative to these homes was that now this one had a redone kitchen. And I want to find a different style home for our comparison, something maybe that isn't renovated. Okay, this one's got some renovations, but I wanted to talk to you about. So this one has now, so along with the 2x8 walls thickness, they had better insulation. The exterior, they started using better stuccos, right? So early 90s, they started figuring out they're using more acrylic stucco. Some of it was still concrete. They had used some shingles were pine shingles, and they were trying to do as treated pine shingle. They weren't very good. So the pine shingles A lot of people, they rotted where cedar won't, and they started putting shakes on low slope roofs like this one, and so the water would sit on them, and then it would weep up back behind and it would rot the shingles. This is vinyl siding. They started doing more vinyl at that time. They did a lot of stucco, and they did some wood. But in the 90s, it was all about low maintenance. Now they had a piping called Poly B, was the force, that was the plumbing, the pressure side of the plumbing. Now this plumbing isn't the end of the world, but in anywhere that it seems like it was located next to a heat source, meaning if it ran across a heat vent or something like that, or a utility room, the the pipe would lose its polymer. I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so this is a great example of what poly B piping looks like. It's gray. It has these copper T's and stuff on it, and it has a copper ring. I mean, Americans used the copper pipe, and then they used a steel ring, and then what would happen is that they would, even the joints would leak, because what would happen was is that these were not, they would actually expand and contract at different rates, and when they did that, the fittings would actually loosen up. So in Canada, we didn't have that problem because we didn't mate the joints with incorrect stuff. This is an example of some example of leaking joints, right? But pretty much poly B is in all these 90s houses, and it's this gray piping. It's not a death sentence for the house. I think where it's within the walls and it's not being heated and cooled, it tends to work out quite fine. It's really okay. But where it's in the utility room and close to any heat source, it tends to lose its polymer, and then of course at some point it just puts a split in the pipe and then it leaks. And so it's interesting to me that the insurance companies are not charging people a lot more money for poly B, but they're not. They're considering it not too bad actually. So that's something you find in those styles of homes. Now, getting back to this style of home, this is like, these are a two-story. This is what I call, again, a two-story split. It was very popular. No bonus rooms in this particular period of time. This was, they had a nice design with this two-story split where the stairway went up. It overlooked the main formal living area. So it would have a formal living area in the front in a traditional style home, and then it would have a formal dining room, and then in the rear it would have a family room, they called it, at the back of the house. So that has kind of a closed kitchen. It's very hard to open this concept up because, of course, the kitchen was always put underneath the second level, so the supporting walls, and they typically were 8-foot ceilings. They didn't have, the only place they created their vault with the two-story split was on the split side, where the bungalow side of the house was, often they would create a vault there. But this here was typical 8-foot ceiling, and people somewhat are unsatisfied with the smaller style kitchen. Now, they weren't designed as an eat-in kitchen. They did put islands in them, but they weren't set up islands like we like today. So they would have a little kitchen nook area, and then they would have a formal dining room, and then this is the family room. And the family room was big enough to have, like a sofa and a chair and a fireplace, and oftentimes they still put sunken living room. So this has got the sunken living room, and that would be the plan for that. So, and generally speaking, we got a little better. We got a half bathroom on the main floor. They put half bathrooms on the main floor in the 80s as well. And they put the main floor was to put a main floor laundry, if not a basement laundry. Bathrooms in these were still fairly small. I mean, there's a single vanity in this one, and a shower and a separate tub. Windows were often wood windows at the time, so oftentimes now they need to be replaced if they haven't been replaced already. Kids' rooms were a little bit bigger back then than some of them today. This is the basement. And basement heights were, where there's no venting, they're 8 feet. Backyards are still reasonably big at this age of house. So when it comes to the floor joists, and these ones were on I-beam. A lot of them were not. Some of the early ones, the earlier part of the 90s, would have been solid floor joists, solid wood floor joists, but they came up with an I-beam with a kind of a particle board. We call it a silent floor joist. And in the 80s, floors were mostly screwed together. Screwed or nailed, and of course the nails squeak, right? So you got squeaky floors in some of these, and squeaky staircases in some of these because they're nailed together. And once we got into the 2000s, everything started to they were starting to be screwed and glued together. So, they were a little bit better, right? That's the typical type of property. Now, if I go to another, let's go to another neighborhood here and see what we get here. Here's another one. People like to fix up these homes, and there are bigger homes to fix. This one is 2,600 square feet. So and this was a 93 house, okay? So, we got the stucco on it, and some of the stucco was still concrete, and some of it was vinyl. This one has asphalt shingles, but they can't. Some of them, even in the 90s, were doing the clay tile. Clay tile is incredibly heavy. Fantastic roof, will last a lifetime. Clay tile, and actually the structure of the roof was built stronger. This is again a two-story split with the vaulted living room in the front, formal dining room there, and it was a typical style for that time. And as you can see, they didn't open up the plan. They did beautiful woodwork at this time. They left the woodwork alone in this one. And of course, the country style spindles coming up and a curved staircase. Main floor dens were popular in the 80s. So they had a den on the main floor. Kitchen went to the ceiling. They created this. They left the ceiling heights high. You can actually see here a little bit of a shadow here where there probably was a drop down ceiling or something in here at one point. And this would be original hardwood, which is done in oak, and these are original cabinets with the exterior not shingles, the exterior hinges on them. And so a lot of wood windows. This is wood windows for this period. And so in the back they had a vaulted ceiling. So this would probably be late 90s where they did these open to below areas, right? And really popular design and nice big houses. But they started putting the houses so big that there wasn't much land on a lot of them. So this is a master bathroom, nice double vanity, but then again the molded plastic top of the vanity. And then we've got, which was popular back in the 80s, was the brass. Everything was brass, right? And it's coming back. It's funny, it's coming back. Lino floors. Every floor, if it was original, every room had a different color carpet. So this is a basement. They put new windows in the basement to make it bigger. You can tell. So a lot of upgrades. This one's backing onto a park. Beautiful location. What people really like about these ones is the neighborhoods. They like the neighborhoods that they have very mature trees, bigger homes, better parks, things like that. So bigger lot sizes, and the way they designed the communities, so it was quite good. Okay, so now we're going to look at 2000 to 2010. So we're going to pull up when I pull this up, you'll see the areas that these homes exist in. It's always good to know. And so let's look at it. So Martindale and Taradale in the northeast and some of the remaining parts of Coral Springs, the last parts of Coral Springs. Now, when you're going north, now you start to see Panorama, Coventry Hills. Now, Coventry Hills started in late 90s, and same with Panorama. So 97, kind of just older homes in Panorama, and same with Coventry Hills. And then, of course, we started to develop over where Stony Trail is, going to Evanston, and then Kincora was primarily in that group or in that age. Later part was Sherwood. Then going west, we got a few homes left over in the Hamptons, the later builds, and then we've got smatterings, a little bit of Arbor Lake and Citadel, but Royal Oak and Rocky Ridge were definitely started in the 2000s, and same with Tuscany was started in the 2000s, right? We got parts of Valley Ridge that were kind of the remainder parts of Valley Ridge. We've got Cougar Ridge. Now all this area started to get developed in this particular time frame, early 2000s, when this was really just started in the west. Now going south, we'll see that Bridlewood, Evergreen, these are early 2000 homes. And then Silverado was at the latter part, 2010. Chaparral was, between the late 90s and at the end of 2010. Cranston definitely started at that period, and that's where you'll find those homes. Of course, Mackenzie Lake was almost completely finished at that time. Mackenzie Town started in the year 2000, and a lot of the properties were built at that period. And the same with New Brighton. New Brighton was near the end of the 2010 era. So the early 2000s was the birth of the bonus room. People don't really see that, and I always get such a kick out of the bonus room, because the bonus room was really the house. And then we'll look at this particular style. So when you see this, we call it a bonus room. So on the listing, does it have a bonus room? I believe it does. So the bonus room is the room that's built above the garage. Okay, so this one does not have a bonus room. Let's pick a different listing. That's usually there's, and like when it comes to 2000, it's kind of a half and half because they just started doing it. And the way to look at the houses, okay, so here, let's just look at this house. So this does not have a bonus room. So typically, this one is a 1,100 square feet on the main, and it's 900 square feet on the second floor. So when you look at the front of a house, usually the ones to tell that are the bonus room are the ones that have, they're completely built over top of the garage. Now, this particular home was a more expensive home to build a home than a home with a bonus room. Most people don't really grasp that. So if you have a 2,100 square foot home that doesn't have a bonus room, physically the main floor is usually bigger. So in other words, what they did is they flipped it. So when we look at the square footage in this house, the main floor is 1152 and the second floor is 955. So when you look at a home that has 1152 square feet on the main floor, it would take a bigger lot than, for example, if this was reversed, where it's 955 square feet on the main floor and it was built over the garage. So the interesting thing about square footage is we, with our Calgary Real Estate Board, we count with square footage as the upper two levels together. Okay, which means is that this lists out as a 2,100 square foot home. But as you can tell, 2,100 square feet isn't 2,100 square feet. It's not all the same. So in an older lot, this was built in 2003 without bonus room, it'll likely have a bigger lot, maybe a larger lot width, because the main floor square footage may be bigger. I had a particular client who was unhappy that she ordered a new house in Royal Oak, and she was unhappy that the main floor on her new home, which was the same size as her old home, was actually almost 200 square feet smaller. Okay, so let's look at a home with a bonus room. We'll be able to find one. Okay, let's look at this one. Okay, so this one has a bonus room. You can see that there's a little bit of a roof, and that's built right over top of the front of the garage. Okay, and that's what we call the bonus room. They called it a bonus because it was almost like they were giving people a free room, right? A free room. But really, it was not free. They were able to make the lot widths even smaller and the lot depth smaller because we have rules about how, with the city, about how much lot you can cover. So the foundations and the basements were smaller. So as we looked at the last listing, we noticed that the square footage was 1120 square feet on the main floor. This one, although listing out as a bigger home, lists out smaller on the main floor, and the second floor is bigger because it can fit over the garage. So you can imagine this one may have a smaller lot and a smaller basement than the house we just looked at. So it wasn't a bonus. As a matter of fact, this home was actually for the builder, cheaper to build. Now, people do like the square footage and they like having a second room upstairs, second living room, and oftentimes these homes, people didn't develop the basements because they didn't need to. They felt that they have a living room on the main and a living room upstairs. But because the homes were smaller on the main floor, the living room on the main floor tended to be smaller. And what they did was they didn't have like the older homes had, oftentimes they had a family room, a full formal dining room, and a family room at the back, a formal living room in the front, and the dining room. Okay, so these homes were different. They had opened up the plan and made a smaller living room and only one room instead of having a dining room. So people tended to like this style, though. I'm not going to beat them up on it. I'm going to say it's okay. It's just that it was cheaper for the builder to build this style of home. So let's look at another house here. We'll look at one in the 700,000 mark. Okay. So this one here is 30 Rocky Spring. Okay. So this one here, look inside. This one has a dining room in the front. It has a living room in the back. This one is a bonus room property. And this one had 9-foot ceilings. That was another big change that happened in the late 90s, early 2000s, as we went to 9-foot ceilings. So before that, before 95, it was rare to find a 9-foot ceiling. So that's one of the design changes. As a matter of fact, I was in this house and showed this house, so I'm very familiar with this one. Uh, but and we didn't get to when they started putting the bonus rooms in. That's when they moved the laundry to the upstairs, and people also felt that they liked that. That was more convenient because it was such a big deal when in the 90s we went from a basement laundry to a main floor laundry. So they put it at the back entrance, and then people were pretty excited about having a laundry upstairs. So they moved the laundry upstairs, and they moved the bonus room upstairs. So they created that square footage up there. And so some people, even to this day, so here's your bonus room, nice big room, nice big living room, and the bonus room gives the ability to have a basement bedroom as basement living room as well. So this one again, so this one lists at 2170 square feet, and as you can imagine with the bonus room, it actually has it's 972 square feet. So again, when I looked at that listing before that was with no bonus room, it had 11, almost 1150 square feet. This one is 10, by 15 bigger, smaller on the main floor. And of course, going along with that, the basement's also smaller. So these are the trade-offs, right, in the styles of home. When people say to me they want a home with a bonus room, the first thing I say to them, I say, well, I want a home with a bonus room. And they say, hey, I want it to be in Hawkwood. And I say, doesn't exist in Hawkwood. Okay, doesn't exist in ranchlands. They didn't build that style of home in those areas. Okay, so when you're looking for a home with a bonus room, it's only going to happen in the late 90s, early 2000s. So all of these neighborhoods that are built, before that, we can't expect to find that style of home. And that's what I wanted to create this video for, is what to find in these styles of homes. Now, when we look at this style of home, what we find for utilities is that the electrical service is the same for these properties as it was for the early 90s. Matter of fact, they're all 100 or 125 amp service. The plumbing is now in the early 2000s is PEX, which is a white plastic piping, and it's proven to be a pretty good, solid, reliable plumbing material for the pressure. And we're still on PVC, and we have the silent floor joists in the basement. Pardon me, silent floor joists on both upper levels. We have longer spans. So one of the things that was an advantage with these silent floor joists, and the reason why we went that way is because the span could be longer, meaning that um, they didn't have as many walls. So what they did was the biggest changes they made to support the second floor was they had the rooms, the plans for these homes were a little bit more open. Matter of fact, they didn't have as many, didn't need as many walls because the beams, which were an engineered beam, and these engineered silent floor joists, which were a lot bigger, allowed them to span a lot longer without any support. So that also gave them the ability to put less rooms on the main floor to make it feel more open, and at the same time give buyers less square footage overall, and then have the bonus room as well over the garage. So it was partially created by new construction methods that happened in the late 90s, early 2000s. That the bonus room was rise of the bonus room, giving people smaller lots so that the developer could put more properties per per area, and in the same size of area they could actually build more properties, and they could actually give people less of a yard, right? So these are the trade-offs that you run into. So when I say to people, look, you know not everything is a win, not everything got better, things got different from every year. And that's why I'm doing this video, is because if we go to Edgemont or Hawkwood or Ranchlands or some of these areas, what we'll find sometimes is that the lot widths are substantially wider and bigger. Now, they may not appear totally bigger because the main floor will be bigger because they didn't have, if they were a two-story split, for example, which they don't build anymore, the main floor would be bigger than the main floor, of course, in a new house, right? One of the big changes that happened, as my experience was, is that when they started, like when I started real estate in the year 2000, they didn't have these overpasses on Crowchild Trail, and so traffic stopped at a traffic light everywhere. And then when they opened that up, it depreciated all these homes in Silver Springs and Scenic Acres because people wanted to buy these ones, and traffic moved so quickly out to the west that that it depreciated those properties. So the opening up of the traffic and putting these traffic circles in and everything else really aided in changing how fast people could get to the outsides of the city. Now, as far as investments concerned, or where to buy a property, I tell people, look, the only way they're going to build west now is if they go into these Bears Paw and small acreages. And so the land is typically very expensive to buy an acreage and put a new development in. That's where you're going to see that if they build anything out in the west, it's going to be quite expensive because they buy 10 acres and a lot cost is going to be 500,000 for the lot. And then you got to build a house on it. So they end up pretty easily at 1.5 million, and they're building monster homes on this property. So you the highest best use for them. Now, what's happening is that this up here was like farmland. So we're building the average buyer home is building in the north, and it's building up here as well, and it's building not as much in the east because we have acreages again, and then in the south we're building a lot of homes in the south because again we've got a lot of farmland down here. So, but more so the economical land to build starter homes and single family homes for the average person is mostly happening up here, and it's happening down in the southeast where you see Mahogany, Auburn Bay, and these areas in here because these are large tracts of land that are bought, you know, by many acres, and not 3 acres, but hundreds of acres at a time, and they're sitting there and they're waiting for development. So those are the areas that are really being developed, and that's where we can see new homes. And of course, south of Silverado, we've got some bigger communities happening here, but we're still running into some smaller acreage properties this way too. So it's not so easy to do to build and expand. So when we come into these styles of homes, let's go back to that a little bit. And the style of the community. Here's a good shot of that. We have all the smaller cul-de-sacs. We have the houses a little bit tighter together because of the way the developer was doing things. We did, at this time. So in the 80s, there wasn't as many what we call walkout basements. If you're looking for a walkout basement, that started happening more and more in the 90s, where the developers really wanted to sell the walkout basements. And so there wasn't as many, and then they started appearing more in the 90s. And then in the 2000s, of course, there's a lot of walkouts. They re-landscaped the properties just to build walkout basements, right? And when I talk about walkout basements, I'll just share with you what that is for those people that don't know. People sometimes say, look, I don't need a big house. I would like a walkout basement on a small lot. And I always say to them, look, they're not so easy to find, especially in an area like, for example, like Royal Oak. The reason is because the developers, of course, want to build the biggest home they can build on the lots. So we actually see more walkout basements in areas that were older in the beginning, like in the 90s, that when a smaller home could be built into it, so the lot size were smaller, and the builder would build a walkout in a small, like 1,000 or 1,200 square foot, a two-story. But now, of course, later as we went along, the builders didn't want to sacrifice that land to build a walkout for a 1,200 square foot walkout. They really wanted to build, a 2,500 square foot home on a walkout. Now, the level of finishing, the level of everything was much higher in, say, a 2,000 or a 2,400 square foot two-story, right? Because they didn't want to utilize the lot to build a smaller property. They wanted to use those view locations and those walkout locations to build the biggest and the highest profit is made on the bigger homes. So they really set aside those properties. Now, the other thing you're probably looking for in the 2000s is maybe you're looking for a bungalow. Now, I can tell you that bungalows were built as spec homes back in the 90s, but we didn't have a lot of spec homes in bungalows after 2000. Builders didn't want to build them, and anytime you see a bungalow, you'll often see that it was a custom home. Somebody sat down with the builder and built exactly what they wanted. So that's important to understand. Now, just so I can clarify some of the styles in the early 2000s and to 2010, typically styles were light maple, and some early styles were golden oak. as far as the finishings and tile. Early 2000s, the finishings were fairly cheap actually. They put in lino even at that time. They did fiberglass surrounds on showers and tubs, and they used the $80 doors, like cheaper doors for these houses. What they did build is, of course, this one has an 8-foot ceiling on the main floor. You can tell by looking at the amount of space above the doors, but the cabinets didn't go to the ceiling. They often were like, this is probably original carpet, beige carpet. They put a more of a bland tile in. Houses were fantastic as far as the locations. Like you can see, this one's got a beautiful view location. But this cabinetry is probably original, and the top would have even at that time, if it was built in 2003, it very likely wasn't even granite because they weren't putting a lot of granite in. We didn't see a lot of granite until 2006 and 2008. Now, um, at this particular time in early 2000s, the market was really good actually. The real estate market was good, and this also generated people to buy properties that weren't as well finished at the time. Smaller casings, which were cheaper, and cheaper doors, and cheaper cabinetry. Light. The two choices for color of cabinetry in early 2000s was white and light maple. That's pretty much it. Late 90s was golden oak cabinets or white. So we've always had those choices. And they had big walk-in closets, and generally speaking, early 2000s, they were still having main floor laundries, and some people, of course, with the bonus rooms were getting their laundries upstairs, right? So, but they did do grand staircases. They built a large amount of square footage, but they built it fairly cheaply. The finishing quality wasn't as good as it was in 2008. Now, when we get to 2008, we start to see different colors going in. So what happened was to our economy is that we had a really bad oil and gas season, and we had low prices in 2008, 2009. The market went down. So what builders did is they changed the style of the homes because they wanted to try to, of course, change the style to, sell above what they sold before. And they started to increase the quality to maintain the price. So the colors changed from the light maple and the lighter colors in 2006, 2007 to go to the darker railings and darker finishings. And they also, this would have been the original flooring would have been a darker medium to dark stained floor. So that's the color changes they went through in 2008. So when I get a call from somebody who wants to list their house, I can tell you that a 2006 house is not the same build quality as a 2008. So by 2008, what they were trying to do is maintain their sales prices by changing the style, upgrading the finishings, and making the finishings nicer, and then maintain the price. It didn't work. By 2009, 2010, they had to start dropping prices because properties weren't selling. So here's a good example of a 2007 kitchen, because it was this was a 2007. So they started to make these changes right about that period. 2006, the market was super hot. Properties were doubling in price. So like, just to give you an idea, in 2005, a 2,200 square foot two-story home was selling at about 225, 230,000, okay, for that. And by 2006, because the market was so hot, they were able to sell that lower quality in 2006, and they were able to sell it for almost double that price. So they were at 440,000 by the end of 2006. So this was kind of in the 2007 version, was kind of like they were seeing that the market was slowing, prices were going down. They were trying to better the finishing to compete against what they sold before. So they went to a cabinet that went to the ceiling. Look at the finish quality here. So they went and put a bulkhead in. They put in granite counters that were dark granite because dark granite was in style. It was, 2007, 2008, they just started making granite standard. It was a new standard in homes. And they put in darker cabinetry. So we saw a lot of espresso colored cabinetry and dark cabinetry. Of course, now we all hate that dark cabinetry. We all want white. And these are, now the other thing they did was a lot of rounded corners at that time, these darker railings. The styles changed, the colors changed. I mean, they went to a lot of these earth tones. Now everybody's trying to paint these colors out and go and brighten the houses up. But they're still left with all the cabinetry, which is dark. And so if you want to be in a community like Royal Oak, Rocky Ridge, you can expect to see homes that are built from the ages from 2000 until about 2006, 2007, maybe 2008. You'll see some dark finishing in Royal Oak, but mostly you're going to see light maple or white or medium stained cabinetry in 2005. This would have been built in from the builder custom. So you won't get that lighter colors unless somebody's done a renovation job on their house in, say, Rocky Ridge here. This is a home in Aspen. This is of course, this is built in 2009. So you see how dark everything got? All the finishing, all the railings got very dark. So if you're looking for cabinet colors to be bright and light in 2000 and late 2000s, then you got to think about the community you're living in. And if you're interested in Aspen, when these were built, they were all built during that period. They might have been white, but they would have been travertine. They would have had granite. This is the colors they came out. No one changed this. This is the original kitchen they had. This one didn't even have a built-in microwave. So if you're asking online, you say, look, I want a property that has a lighter kitchen, like I want a bright kitchen, and I want it to be in Aspen. I'm going to say, okay, so you may have white, but you might have dark flooring because it was popular then, unless somebody changed it. So it would have to be a renovation. Somebody would have to have been dissatisfied with enough to renovate it. Cabinet styles were better. They put a topper valance, and a lot of cabinets had an under cabinet lighting. This one didn't even have an under cabinet lighting, and they had 9-foot ceilings. Even you can see here, this is like a builder grade stove, and this is like $855 is the sales price in 2023. So incidentally, it doesn't really matter where you go. When you think about darker finishings, they're going to be late 2000s, like 2010, that area. So if I go down to Silver Springs, I'll see the same colors down here, and here's one. This is built in 2007. Okay, so this 2007 home, we can probably guess it'll either be dark because they changed in 2006. It'll be dark or light, dark wood. Dark cabinets and the granite counters. See? So they put this style throughout these homes. So if you're looking in a community and you say, I want to be in a particular community and I want to find a bright white kitchen and I want lighter colored hardwood, you have to find a renovation. And the problem is with a lot of these neighborhoods is that they don't have a lot of renovation because their cabinets are still in good condition. So people don't start taking out cabinets just for the color. They'll take out the cabinets because they're worn. And look at this kitchen. It still looks like it's in good condition. And the granite, of course, which is out of style now, is still in good condition. So there's not a lot of people that are going to, break up a new kitchen and put in, new hardwood and everything else when everything else is still good. Now this is very likely even original colors because we had more earth tone colors, medium to dark colored, textures, right? This was a very cheap cabinet. Didn't have an upper. This is a cheaper home. Didn't have an upper valance. Didn't have. Looks like they did put the lower valance on with the under cabinet lighting. Big thing was in the 2000s to put pot drawers in. Even in the 90s, they put nice big pot drawers in. But as you can see here, this one has even 8-foot ceilings. It doesn't have 9-foot ceilings. It's a smaller home for that period. Okay, and so in areas like Walden, we just see a couple of homes, and this would have been a show home for the area because it would have been one of the first homes they built in Walden. There's no other homes that are this old. So let's have a look at the finishing here. Dark black granite, cabinets, dark cabinets. They put in light flooring. So they started to change in 2009. They were starting to lighten things up. 8-foot ceilings on the main floor. 9-foot is actually an option still. They're still building up until the end of 2000. And this home had a bonus room with an open to below on the back, which was really nice, but black granite. At the time when they first started putting granite in houses, it was all black granite. And this one's an overmount sink. It's not even undermount sink. Okay, so now we're going to go through homes that were built in 2010 to 2020. And we're going to be locating the areas that those exist in. And that'll help you when you're looking at communities. Okay, so here we go. Like in the south, most of the houses are going to be below 22x. We got some of Copperfield, and that would be the early part of 2010, to early 2010s. And then we got all of these areas like Walden and, the newer parts of Cranston. And we've got Auburn Bay. So let's look at a typical house in Auburn Bay and look at the year built. Okay, so this one's 2015. This will give you an idea what was built in 2015. So, we got still like we got vinyl siding. Now, regarding these houses, all the structure of these homes are built the same as 1995. Nothing changed. There was no real big changes. The floor joists are the same style. The plumbing is, of course, PEX from 2000, and the plumbing, the drains are all PVC, and what we have is now, in the 2000s, we started doing acrylic stucco, which is better, and we do vinyl siding, and we did some hardy board, which came in on the sides, right? So it's not as much maintenance on these houses. Windows, were wood into late 80s, and some wood windows were in the 90s were wood, and then we went to more vinyl windows. And here's the colors. This would have been original, so they started brightening things up. White. Here we got some white around the fireplace. We got this probably is original wood. And see, like, look at our kitchen. So our kitchen now is a combination. It started right, and this year they started doing that. They started putting a feature island in, so they would mix some dark in with some light, and they have light colored cabinets, light backsplash, and a lighter colored wall. I mean, like it's almost a gray wall, right? So everything got a little bit brighter. And of course, keep in mind they always do this. The builders do this in order to um, in order to sell something new, they got to come out. And now we got quartz counters, which is cheaper than doing granite. Okay, because granite was expensive, right? It would break. It wouldn't cut nicely. So of course now this is cheaper and people like it. So I'm not going to say that this man-made quartz product is a bad product. People do like it. So it gives them the idea they've got granite. Now this is an older style cabinet front, but we've got on this one we've got a fiberglass floor plan with a tile shower, and the tile is a little bit lighter and more modern. So this is the colors we went to in early 2010s. Now, as we can see though, we will probably find out. Look at the frontage on this one's quite small, but we've got 1,000 square feet on the main, and we got 1389 on the second floor. So again, these homes with bonus rooms had smaller main floors, and of course we continued that direction. And I think most of the homes built in 2010 and newer have bonus rooms now. People have really adopted and really like that. So going back to the areas that you're going to find these colors in, you're going to find, in newer areas, you're going to find West Spring started building these. Okay, so now you got Aspen Woods built a lot, Springbank built a lot, and in the north now less in Rocky Ridge, Royal Oak, hardly any homes were built there. Now we end up into these areas, like in the north, it's Evanston, Sage Hill, Kincora, Noland Hill. Actually, Kincora is not much in Kincora. Most of it's going to be Noland Hill, Sage Hill, and Evanston, the northern part. This is an old part of Evanston, so you're going to find that. We have smatterings of homes that came in from the north in Panorama, and then we got these new areas that are emerging as well. And that's really in the last couple of years. So when you look at the east and northeast, we've got the area communities of Skyview Ranch and these areas. So if you're asking for a home that hasn't been renovated, and you want to live in, say, Royal Oak, of course, you're not going to find those lighter color finishings very often unless somebody renovated them. Now, when you see these here, there was a section of Royal Oak that wasn't developed, but they're all high end, right? So they're all over $1 million in this particular section. So if you're looking for that typical home and you want light colors and you're looking in some of these other areas because you like the schools, just know that you're going to be hard pressed to find them. I had a client of mine who said he wanted a bonus room and he wanted light colors, and he wanted to find that home with a view in Rocky Ridge. And I had to drive him down many streets to say, look, less than 50% of the homes actually have a bonus room, and the color in the kitchen is not going to be bright because they didn't do that then. So that was one of the problems that he had, was going through that. So this video is really to educate you on where to find the homes that you're most interested in, and the styles in which areas they built them in. Because I think sometimes people are looking forever in areas and saying, I want this style of home in this area, and then they're rare as hen's teeth, or they don't exist, period. So with all that said, I know that people often know the styles of homes now that on the later styles, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on 2010 to 2020 because we can all see these in the new communities, and we've all seen that the construction methods are the same as the last few years. I think that the only thing I can see in the latter years is that they've actually and this is what year is this one? This is 2012. So somebody was a little bit behind and they requested they wanted darker finishings from the builder. And so when the builders weren't putting this, they oftentimes weren't putting these darker finishings in these ages of homes, right? So you won't find them as often in the latter homes. But certainly 9-foot ceilings here, and all of the plumbing workings of these homes are very similar to the 2000s as far as construction methods go. So if you're thinking about construction methods, the only thing different about the 90s homes was the layout and the poly B piping. Everything else, the construction methods were just about the same. So with all that said, if you got any questions about anything in any area, you can always reach out, make a comment, or just text me through my website or give me a phone call. I'd be happy to help you out. Have a great day.